Yo, what is up guys? My name is Grizzly, welcome back to another League of Legends video. I know it's been quite a while, my bad, I've been doing other stuff, I've been producing some music. Actually, the background track for this video will be a song I have produced myself, so hopefully it won't be too terrible. But other than that, let's get straight into today's video, where I'm gonna cover how to play top lane Gragas. And I've been playing this a lot recently, and he has two very viable different build paths that are both like very... it really depends on the game and what you want to accomplish in the game, so it's a really fun character to develop your skills with, because you can alter his gameplay so differently depending on what role you want to suit. So I've done some research and I've also played top lane Gragas a lot recently, maybe like 60 games the past couple of weeks. I played it a lot, and the best Gragas I have found in the world right now that plays a lot of Gragas top lane is this guy right here. And as you can see, he's playing on the Korean ladder and he's mastered here. He's at 0 LP, but still like 0 LP masters in Korea is super good. And he has a negative win ratio on the champion, but I think he has dabbled around a lot with trying to find like a good build, and he's playing like only top lane Gragas right now, but he played it jungle before. You can see it on the quite low CS score, so he probably played it a lot jungle first, but then he decided to start playing in top lane, and he plays it full AP like all the time, and his full AP build is actually really interesting. So I copied it and tried it out after playing AP Gragas a lot myself, and his build is actually super good. So what he does is that he runs Electrocute, and he goes into Sorcery as his secondary. So the interesting thing here is that he doesn't go Resolve, which is kind of the standard for most top laners. And another thing to note is that he also builds Luden's Echo, which I didn't do myself, but I started doing it and it turned out to be actually super good when I tried it. So, but before we go into like the detailed builds, because there is also a tank build for Gragas that works really well, we're first gonna cover like his runes. So I'll pull the runes right over here, we'll make a new page together. So the AP page is the domination as your primary tree, and you obviously go into Electrocute for the added burst potential. It's super good on Gragas. Then sudden impact, because your E procs this and you use your E when you want to combo most of the time, so it's super good for Gragas. This ends up dealing like almost as much extra damage as Electrocute itself, so sudden impact is definitely a must on this row. On this row here, you could take Zombie Ward because it adds a lot of warding pressure to the map, but like it's solo queue, people won't really look at wards, it's not that important, so I would just take Eyeball Collection, and get some extra AP. And then on the last row here, Ravenous Hunter is the standard because it gives you more all-in power and sustain in lane phase, but if you want to roam a lot, or if you think that you will like snowball really hard, you can take Relentless Hunter to move around the map faster. It's really up to you. And as for our secondary tree, the standard is to go into Mana Flow Band Transcendence. This like gives us more mana because we will rush Hextech Proto Belt, so we will quite heavily, and this helps us a lot with that. And then Transcendence is just really good for scaling. You could obviously go like Celerity. Scorch is pretty useless because most people run Bone Plating, and Scorch's damage is completely negated by the Bone Plating. And Celerity is kind of good, it gives us move speed and some AP, but overall I prefer Transcendence, because even if we cap CDR with our build, we get that extra AP if we get over the cap, so it's overall really good. Ultimate Hat is also a decent alternative, but overall I think Mana Flow Band is the better choice. You could also run Resolve as your secondary, even if you go Electrocute as your primary rune. And here we take Bone Plating and Chrysalis, which gives us 50 extra HP, and it also gives us, it converts the 50 extra HP into AP if we get 4 kills or assists. So this basically like ends up giving us more AP than actually going into Sorcery as a secondary later on into the game, but some games it takes quite a long time to get to 4 kills or assists, but the 50 extra HP is also nice, and from taking this tree as our secondary we also get 15 to 135 scaling HP, so we gain a little bit more tankiness, but we lose some damage and also lose that extra CDR, which can be converted into quite a bit of AP. So this is like the two AP alternatives. If you go tank Gragas, you want to go Resolve as your primary tree, and you take Grasp of the Undying. This is quite easy to proc in lane as Gragas, and you gain extra maximum HP, which is really good for him. Then on the first row we take Bone Plating obviously because it's super strong. Then we take Second Wind into lanes that will harass us quite a lot, and we take Chrysalis against lanes which are pretty free. And if we want to go for the like maximum scaling, and if we really want to like be as tanky as we can later on into the game, we can take Conditioning. And as for the last row here, I think that Revitalize is actually really good on Gragas. It gives him a lot more healing with his passive, but overall I would say that Overgrowth is just a really strong rune right now, especially if you're better at the game than average and you farm a lot. I would say like if you average 200 CS a game or something, you should take Overgrowth, but if you average like under 200 CS a game, you should probably go Revitalize, so it really depends. Then on the secondary row here, I actually really like going into Domination and taking Sudden Impact and Ravenous Hunter, because I just think that Sudden Impact is so good on Gragas. But you could also go into Sorcery, and you can go like this. So these are two alternatives. It really doesn't matter. It's no like set scenario where either one is better. It really is up to preference. So those are the rune pages for Gragas. And now we'll go into the items. So obviously your build will depend a lot depending on if you want to go AP or tank. So as for AP and tank, your first starting items will always be Doran's Ring and 2 pots in my opinion, because even if you face someone like Jace, where you as another like tank would go Doran's Shield to negate the poke, as Gragas you get a lot of sustain from being able to cast a lot of abilities because of your passive, and Doran's Ring gives you a lot more mana, so overall it's like a really good choice. It doesn't really depend on the lane, it's like overall just the best starting item for Gragas. And as for the core items as AP, Sorks are really good if you're snowballing and if you're ahead and if you can one-shot the enemy. Mercs if you're against like a Vladimir, which you can't one-shot in lane obviously, and you still want like the extra MR. This Tenacity doesn't really help against Vladimir, but more often than not the enemy will have a CC in jungle, so overall Mercs is good against like sustaining AP lanes, like Swain would be an example where it's also super good. And then Ninja Tabis against like Irelia, Jax, if you're like even with them, but if you're ahead of Jax or Irelia you can probably go Sorks and just one-shot them, so it really depends. As for our first item as AP Gragas, it will always be Proto Belt. It's just such an important item, because people will most of the time like space you in a way that you can't E them, so they can be safe. If you have Flash obviously then you can Flash E them, and that's how Gragas gets a lot of his kills, but Proto Belt like kinda messes with the enemy's head of what range you can approach them from, so that's like one aspect of it that's super good in higher elo. But even for lower elo it adds a lot of wave clear, health, AP, CR. It's a super cheap item, overall just a super good item for Gragas, so it's our first core item all the time. And then somewhere in your build you will use Rabadon's Death Cap, but it won't be the second item most of the time. The second item will be either I like Lich Bane a lot myself. If you go into the enemy's facing and proc that W Lich Bane attack, it deals a lot of damage, but the Korean Gragas player that has a lot of success actually builds Luden's Echo, and it doesn't go Lich Bane, and he plays more of a like far back playstyle where he pokes the enemy a lot, but I like to be in my enemy's face with Lich Bane, but sometimes I feel like sitting back as well, and then Luden's is super good. Obviously the better thing with going Luden's over Lich Bane is that it gives us 10% more CDR, and it also gives us a lot more mana, so we can like throw out a lot more spells. So that's like the positive things with Ludens. And then I really like Oblivion Orb. I finish Morellonomicon only if I need the healing reduction or as an endgame item, but like a standard build for me would be Hextech Proto Belt into Sheen, into Oblivion Orb, into finishing Lich Bane, and then going into like Rabadon's or Void Staff. And for the other person like the Gragas one trick on Korea, he goes like Hextech Proto Belt. Also note he most of the time rushes Ninja Tabis, but it would be Ninja Tabis, Proto Belt, and then it would be Oblivion Orb into Luden's Echo for him, and that's also super good build for like ranged poke, so it really depends. As for the other items here, Void Staff obviously as like a third or fourth or fifth item depending on how much MR the enemy team has. Sometimes you won't even need it, but that's very rare, so most of the time you will get a Void Staff. Lyander's Torment is only used if the enemies have 2 to 3 like heavy tanks, or like 4 pseudo tanks I would say. So it's really only good if they build a lot of HP. And then Sonya's if you need the active, I would say, because the stats are quite whack, so if you need the active on Sonya's, I would build this. If they have like a full AD team, it also obviously has a lot of value, so those two scenarios. And then Banshee's Veil if you're, I would say, ahead and you're scared of a certain CC spell hitting or of poke in general. Because this item doesn't really give that good stats, so if you're behind you can't really afford to go this because you'll be too weak in like an all-in situation, but it can be like a really good win more item if you're afraid of like a Cocoon landing from an Elise, or like a Seraph poking you, or a So Is Sleep bubbling you, or whatever it's called. And then this is the AP build, and then as for the tank build, our core will be either Mercs or Ninjas, of course, and this depends on the enemy lane most of the time. And then our rush item will always be Iceborne Gauntlet. I would say even if you're against like an AP opponent, it's probably at least worth going into the Sheen and then going into either Spirit Visage or Adaptive Helm, but sometimes it can even work out going Mercs into Iceborne Gauntlet even against an AP opponent, because with this item you have like such a good spike that I really like, can't see a situation where it wouldn't be good. And then I like going into Deadman's after this, but even if I don't go with second item, I will probably run it later into the game to like have that more like forwarding pressure where you can run into the enemy faster and get that extra bit of burst as well with the active and the slow. It's like a super good item for Gragas. Like people that play Gragas jungle usually rush this straight after Cinderhulk or the AP item or after Iceborne Gauntlet, but like these two on tank Gragas are just so good in my opinion. And then if you need like the extra wave clear, Sunfire Cape can be good, especially if you're against an opponent that will like melee you all of the time, that won't space you that much. So for example against other tanks, Sunfire Cape is actually a really good alternative. Warmock's armor is super high value. I think it's like 110% gold effective, even without like the passive, so it's really effective, but you have to keep in mind that it's not really worth going unless you hit that 3000 maximum health though, because even though it's quite effective, it only gives you HP, and HP is like kind of a bad stat right now in the meta because there's so much like percentage health damage. So only build this if you get the passive, and I would only go it as like a third or fourth item, maybe a fifth. Also, it's really good in sieges and if you're Baron dancing, because it regens your HP really fast. Random is against people that build a lot of crit, and also if you face a Yasuo, you should probably rush this like second or third item depending on how the lane is going. Thornmail is a really good item. It's like if you want to build Thornmail, Randoms, but they don't have a lot of crit, then you go Thornmail instead. That's kind of the thought process. And also if you want to reduce healing from the enemy, it's really good. So for example against an Aatrox, this is like a core item. Spirit Visage is your standard magic resist item. It's really good with your passive because it increases all healing received by 30%. Also, obviously, really good if you have like a Soraka on your team, stuff like that. But oh, I actually have 2 randoms here. I just noticed. But if you don't really want the like extra healing, you don't really think it's necessary, or if you're against like a Malzahar or something like with a lot of dots and continuous spells that hit a lot of times, like a Syndra for example with their ultimate, then Adaptive Helm is just a must in my opinion, and then you can't really value the 30% extra healing too much, because if you can like reduce the damage of a Syndra ult by like 20%, then that's a lot more valuable than the extra healing obviously. So and then Frozen Heart is only used when you're against a full AD team, and you can go Iceborne Gauntlet and Frozen Heart and get that 40% CDR really fast, and you also have a lot of armor. So, but if you're against like a balanced team comp, then I never go Frozen Heart. So, and then Righteous Glory is if you're really ahead, or alternatively if your team is really ahead and you just really want to make engages happen for your team, then Righteous Glory is a good alternative for Gragas, but it's not like an every game item, so you really only want to build this when you're yourself really ahead or when your team is really ahead. But that's it for setting up Gragas. I will probably release gameplay of him in the future, maybe like a rank game or something where I commentate over the game, but this is how to set him up properly, and you should really try both of the builds out. They're really good, and I think Gragas Top Lane is actually very underrated right now. So anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.